bonuses.
I do have to hit the record button. That's the most important thing. And I don't have my talk show.
Oh, do you want me to do it for you? This is a post-apologetic.
You want to?
No, I don't. I don't think I have it memorized, but I do like the. We like to say this is blessed talk, not happy.
Okay, I'll try. I'll see what I can do.
Applied theology.
Post-apologetic, ultimately hopeful applied theology.
We look at news and world events from Christian worldview.
I probably need to get rid of that project.
No, don't break free because then I feel like I have to.
Okay, let's go. Here we go. Welcome to White Pill Radio, the roughly every other episode version of theology
On air.
What
We should
caught
just
me
all
up
do it.
was that I meant to make today's episode that went out for next week because I moved things around and I didn't backdate the other ones.
I don't.
Anyway,
Okay.
one went out today and I meant for it to go out next week so that this would go out today.
Well, you can still put this out today.
We'll just put two out in one day.
Ooh.
Bonus.
Exciting.
Spicy.
Wow.
Okay.
We should get paid more for that. Okay, here we go. Welcome to White Pill Radio, the roughly every other episode version of Theology on Air, which is an outgrowth of Theology by the Pint, which is an amazing ministry in Houston where we have interesting conversations monthly around craft beer and interesting conversations, interesting topics like morality and theology and politics and faith and all kinds of things. White Pill Radio is ultimately hopeful, post-apologetic, applied theology where we look at Christian or news and events from a Christian worldview. We try to add, some good news to all the things going on in the world. I like to say that this show is blessed talk, but not happy talk. Yeah, so nothing mundane here. We want to look at some spicy things, but relevant things from a Christian point of view. So that's what we do here on White Pill Radio. Some people don't know what that means, by the way. The red pill keeps you into reality. The blue pill, you're in the matrix. You're still sleeping forever. The black pill is you're a doomer, and white pill is you know how things are, but you're fine. You've taken the red pill, and you're still hopeful. There are other colors out there, by the way.
I only knew about the two.
Yeah. There's more pills out there. So
The more you know.
Anyway, so theologybythepint.org. Theologybythepint.org. Go there to learn about all of our upcoming events and who we are and interesting things coming up in Kingwood. We have an event in Kingwood around masculinity, the world men.
Feminism and
So that one will be fun. So do go to theologybythepint.org to support us, learn how you can make more of this happen, subscribe, hit the bell, tell people about us.
write a review.
Yes.
Yeah.
5 stars, all that kind of stuff. Okay, we are joined today by Mace. Who are you?
Hello. Yeah, I'm Mace Perez. I'm a church planter and pastor. Planted a church called The Journey in the Heights almost a year ago to the day. We're about to be celebrating our 1-year anniversary. So excited about that.
Very cool. What's your website?
thejourneyhouston.org.
Cool.
I'm Sarah Stone. I'm the executive director for Theology by the Pint, and I'm glad to be back. Y'all did a couple without me, which were actually good, and I was sad about it. But
it's been so long since we've seen you.
I've got some stuff going on. Yeah.
Yes. Well,
anyway,
good things.
Yes. And you are?
I'm Taylor Neal. I have a master's degree in philosophical apologetics from Houston Christian. I've worked a couple of years as a discipleship pastor and also as a college pastor, and I try to help people wrestle through their big questions.
And he's been on a couple of our panels and a couple of our podcasts. So these are just old regulars.
Yeah. I'm gonna start us off. Then I'm gonna go over there and mess with mic levels. But okay, you ready to jump in?
So ready.
Okay, so Donald Trump this week basically said he wants America to be stupid.
Yep, that's what I heard. We can move on.
Yeah, he signed an order Thursday aimed at eliminating the Department of Education, which was started with Jimmy Carter, and every Republican since then has said they were going to kill the Department of Education. He can't really do that. Congress has to technically rescind it because it's like a whole department, but he can basically defund it. And as we've talked about many times on the show, there's a war about what the executive, can do, and judges are stopping a lot of the things he's trying to do, like, deport illegal immigrants and things like that. We don't need to dwell on that. But it looks like the U.S. Department of Education is really going to get seriously defunded and dismantled, and maybe by a couple of years from now, it really will be gone. And I would say in kind of the normie world, people are going to freak out about this. They're absolutely convinced this is the worst thing that could ever happen to children. Others are pointing out that education in the last 40 years has gone straight down. Public schools aren't what they used to be, and
Indeed.
maybe not even safe places. I know like Matt Walsh, for example, he talks about how the Department of Education has found, just rampant sexual abuse, so it's not just that
And covered it up.
the grades are going down, but like kids aren't safe. So there's, I don't know, but maybe, I'm happy for it
Wait, before you go on,
Yeah.
so if people don't know much about the Department of Education, what does this mean? Like, it doesn't mean we're not going to educate people anymore. Do you want to say, or do you want me to?
I pay a school tax. And
Okay,
it
thank
doesn't
you.
it doesn't go to the federal government. It goes to the HISD, Houston Independent School District. And so I don't know exactly how the money works. I assume some of our income tax goes to the Department of Education. It's like a $250 billion budget. A lot of that is Pell Grants and federal student loans. I don't know how much money actually makes it back down to the schools, but I do think a pretty healthy amount does end up back in the states. So I think what will get worked out is that basically the federal government's going to say, you're not going to get money from us, but this is money you don't have to send our way.
Right. It doesn't have to get funneled through. It
Yeah.
used to go to the state, up to federal, back to the state, and then help kids.
And
Now
there's
it's just gonna go-
no loss in any of those processes. It was, there was no like bureaucratic overhead that made that amount decrease every step along the way.
He's being so ironic, you guys. You can't see his face.
Yeah.
But yes, obviously money was lost.
Yeah.
And so the idea is putting it back in the states gets more money and more kind of like what's the word I'm
Freedom,
looking?
autonomy.
Thank you. Yeah.
States have
Yeah.
more
Autonomy is the word.
control.
Yeah. They know what their state needs. They know what their schools need. And yeah. So it's not taking money
Parents
away
know what their
from
children need.
truly. It's not taking money away
Right.
from education. It's
And-
actually giving more
and,
money.
Yeah, it's like a lot of these things, a lot of these cuts that are being made right now. I think that in time, what we're going to be finding, actually, this is something that's come up a lot, and Ken and I talk about this a lot. Because as a libertarian, I guess economically, he's very much opposed to tariffs. He's a fair trade, free trade guy, and so the question is constantly, well, aren't tariffs going to make prices go up? And we had a lot of tariffs in Trump's first term, and we didn't have inflation then. We had basically zero inflation. It was like under 2%. Meanwhile, average wages went up quite a bit. So probably what will happen is that American goods won't go up at all. Their price won't go up at all. Well, they might if they get some raw materials from elsewhere. Anyway,
I hope you're right.
yeah. So I don't think inflation is the money supply. It has nothing to do with prices going up. Those are two different things to begin with. But I think that I am hopeful that what's going to happen is that after 2 or 3 years, after people stop panicking, and this is going to happen, and that's going to happen, it's going to be all these terrible things. What we're going to find is, it's fine. Nothing changed with education. But I think we should have a broader conversation about like the disconnect that's going on in education right
Yeah.
now. Okay. So I would say two major disconnects, and this is kind of de rigueur in our maybe more conservative circles, but what they teach and how they teach. So what are they teaching in public schools? I can't think of a single subject right now that's kind of been left alone for 50 years. They teach math differently. The literature standards have changed. My children are not learning the same American literature, or they wouldn't if they were in 10th grade that I learned in 10th grade. That was our, American literature year. We learned Nathaniel Hawthorne, Ethan Frome.
Beowulf. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now they're
Paradise
trying to
Lost.
pull
Well,
Shakespeare.
I was thinking
Hey.
of American, but S. Scott Fitzgerald, Ernest Hemingway. They don't read that anymore. It's like a lot of this is where like the woke DEI, CRT kind of stuff comes in. Like all these kind of like issues, and like kind of topical books, have taken over kind of a lot of these classics.
And gross books that are
Lots
on
of
the
gross
quote
books.
banned books list.
Yes.
And I didn't realize my own kids both read at least one of the ones that's when I sort of got more into politics, I realized it's really, really foul, like
Yeah.
pornographic.
Yeah.
And they both read that. Ugh.
Yeah.
Well, I think a possible angle to defend the actions of the administration too, because I know you guys have a diverse audience out there, and
We're trying to fix that.
the woke stuff might not be super persuasive to somebody who's inclined to favor that kind of thing. But if you just look at the education outcomes over the last 40
Yeah.
years, the fruit is very sour. I mean,
Yeah.
this thing's
Yeah.
going the wrong direction. I'm actually in favor of some kind of I don't know if a law needs to be passed, but if you do create a new department or agency and they don't at least
Perform.
have movement towards their stated goals for 40
Yeah.
years, they should be automatically
But like,
revoked.
but we don't even agree on like what we should teach kids. Like, So I look at, say, a country like China, and there's a lot that I don't like about China. It's not exactly a free country in many respects. It's a very wealthy country in many respects, but it's not free. I think they may be more free than us. I'm not sure. But if you look at their education, like they're very clear on what they want their kids to learn. Like they're going to learn these subjects, and failure is not an option. We just watched Apollo 13, the movie, as a family the other night. And, like that's the Ed Krentz famous quote. That's where it comes from. Failure is not an option. Like we're going to get these people home, figure it out, figure out the carbon dioxide filter, make it happen. That's not our mentality in America anymore. You know, we don't
lower standards.
We have lower standards, and it's like it's not just lower in like lower test scores. Like we don't. I'm not even sure we want children to be smart or like be excellent or I don't know. What do we want our children to learn? There is a fundamental disagreement, I think, on the left and the right, broadly speaking, on what we even want children to learn. Like, what kind of skills do we want them to have? Like, what is important? What kind of culture do we want them to learn? Like, that's why these fights about culture are so important. Like, do we teach, classical school or classical music? I mean,
well, this raises an issue that Mace mentioned off air about if we do defund the Department of Education, by definition, more power is returned to the states. And so some of these things could be debated on a more localized basis. And that seems like a good move in terms of the culture divide.
Yeah. You don't have to say where you live, but do you homeschool or y'all go to a nice public school?
Yeah, well, we have a homeschool hybrid program for 2 of our kids, and one of our kids goes to private.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. Yeah. And Mace used to homeschool.
Used to?
So I'm a former public educator, and our oldest went to public for 4 years.
Well, you know more about this than all of us.
And then when we moved down here, we started homeschooling, which that's a whole story. We kind of like limped into homeschooling, but are glad we found it. And so, I mean, as far as this, like, I do like sympathize as a former public educator. As a former foster parent who sees there are some kids in some really rough situations that for them, the public school does offer some benefits. Having a ton of friends, like I sympathize with those who get really scared when stuff like this happens. But
there's kids that the only healthy meal they might eat in the week comes from school. So to your point.
Right. Yeah. And so I sympathize.
Well, now that RFK's in charge, it's going to be healthy again.
Let's hope so.
Yeah.
But I do, as a homeschool parent, just kind of being out of the system. And we grew up, my wife and I both graduated from public schools, and there was a lot of good things about that. But I would say now that we're out of the system, this is kind of my whole take on the education. A lot of my friends they're very concerned about the money, and that's a lot of the concern with this, right? That we have to throw more money. The problem in education is the funding, but the problem is we're spending so much money, like, for not enough return on our investment, that maybe we need to rethink how we're doing it rather than
and
just
somehow
throwing
charter
more
schools
money.
are able to do more with less.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, my wife and I'm not the most educated person on like vouchers and stuff like that, but my wife and I have conversations about like the amount of money that we pay in taxes to the public school. Do you know what we could do as a homeschool family with that?
Right.
That amount of money? Like our homeschool budget is basically the equivalent of like rice and beans. Could you imagine if all the money that we were giving we were able to keep to invest directly into the education of our children? Part of that being, you mentioned overhead. You're cutting out all the overhead.
Right.
There's no
You're not paying
buildings
for all those people.
There's no buildings to pay for. There's no salaries to pay for, and on and on and on.
Yeah.
I like it. Let's get rid of all income tax.
Well, actually,
I know that's in the last article.
Ken's
Second to
not
last
here,
article.
so you have to get that in here.
No, I'm with Ken on that, sort of, with some provisions. But anyway.
Okay, give us some background on your article, kind of how it came to be, and why it shows that education is important.
You have to segue.
That was my segue.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah. So y'all might be familiar with the YouTube channel Jubilee. That's the one where they put, they do different types of videos, but the ones that tend to get the most go the most viral, you have one person representing a certain perspective, and they're surrounded usually by about 20 people of the opposite perspective, and it's kind of like
in the hot
one
seat.
on 20 debate. So Charlie Kirk has done it, Ben Shapiro's done it, and a recent one was Sam Sater, who is a progressive. He's a former actor, and he's a progressive commentator, and he was debating a bunch of MAGA supporters. And there's a couple clips that went pretty viral. If you watch the whole video, I don't disagree with everything that he said. I don't agree with everything that his debaters said. But one of the clips that went viral, the claim that he made basically had something to do with his concern now that Trump is elected about religious fundamentalism taking over the country. And so this gentleman named Eliezer, so the way it works is the way you earn the right to debate the person in the middle publicly is you have to race to the chair. And we can talk about whether or not that's the best way to do it. But this guy, he earned his right to debate, and he basically calls Sam Sater out for having no objective basis for morality. And Sam just like gets himself all in a twist where he's like, well, I think we should do the most good for the most amount of people and prevent harm for the few, prevent harm for the greatest number of people. And so he's like, okay, so you're a utilitarian. He's like, well, I don't want to claim that label. I think we as a society, and then he appeals like multiple times to democracy. Like, well, if society as a whole has said this is good or this is bad, then we should follow that. And his debater just basically keeps saying, so like, if we all say that, pedophilia is fine, like you'd be okay with that. He's like, no. And he's basically just gets them all in a twist. And I think it really, did a really good job of showing that the secular worldview does not have an objective basis for morality. And if you want to tie it into education, it shows like, so for us now as a homeschool family, we're like, okay, the public school system is designed to, these are the learning outcomes that we want. These are the certain skills, which is really kind of an outdated way of educating. So what my wife and I, as far as it relates to education, is what we want our kids to know is we want them to love learning, first of all. Aww. We want them to know how to learn, and we want them to develop critical thinking skills. And again, with all due respect to my friends in the public education world, the public education was failing my son in all three of those. And we have had to and we are still working on undoing some of the damage that was done in trying to build him in those ways. So I'd commend the whole episode. This clip starts at about 25 minutes, but I think, like I said, it shows that there is ultimately no objective basis for morality. And I know we have some, theology by the pine is big into apologetics. I think it shows why the moral argument for the existence of God, I do think, is one of the stronger ones. And you see intellectually consistent atheists and secularists starting to admit that, though Sam was not one.
But what's so interesting is they start to admit that, but then their solution is that we should all pretend that objective morality exists anyways as a practical matter for society.
Right.
That's why you have cultural Christians like Richard Dawkins. And
you call him a cultural Christian?
He calls
himself a cultural Christian.
Oh my God!
He's on record.
He said he liked Noel's at Christmas time and Christmas trees.
No, I remember all of that stuff, but I didn't know he would actually take that label. Keep going.
Yeah, well, so it struck me as so impotent, that these people that should be so about the logic and following everything to its conclusion would, on this incredibly important foundational kind of principle, they would say, well, we've got to plug something in there in the absence because we don't have anything. And to me, if your worldview can't account for all of the essential aspects of reality, then probably examine your worldview.
Yeah.
Or even asking, like, if you press them on that, well, okay, if it's a practical matter, it's like, well, this is best for society. Well, how do you decide what is best for society or not, right? Like,
what do you mean by best?
Yeah, exactly right.
That's right.
So I'm looking at some of the dialogue. It might be helpful to read through just like a little bit of it. I mean, obviously people should watch it on their own. But okay, so he says he has a problem with religious fundamentalism, and then he's like, well, what's the problem with that? And he says, well, they would want to impose their morality that comes from their religion on the rest of us, and I don't. And Eliezer says, but morality from your view is going to be a preference right. It's not morality, it's a preference. And he says, and Sam Sater says, and then the other guy, Eliezer says, so morality without a foundation is going to reduce you to a preference. Okay, that's kind of the heart of the argument.
Right.
That's a not publicly educated guy. That guy was smart. You think he was a homeschooled guy? Seems like it, maybe.
He does have a YouTube channel I found where
Eliezer?
he does sidewalk evangelism, and,
Oh,
and he
wow.
engages in this kind of I don't know if he's a presuppositionalist per se. I haven't listened enough to say that, but he is in that kind of Socratic method of
Yeah.
trying to get to the base of the worldview and
Interesting.
whatnot. But the point is that when someone says, I don't like theocrats, like Donald Trump is the least theocratic person I could
What
ever
is a
imagine.
theocrat for
You know,
people listening?
Yeah, well, it's someone who wants to impose their religious point of view, as a form of government.
Okay.
So like religious law would be undistinguishable from ceremonial law, like Sharia law, in the Muslim world or something.
I mean, kind of what we came over here from England to try to get away from, right? I mean, that was ostensibly one of the reasons.
Well, I would argue that we brought common law to America, and English common law is derivative from Old Testament civil law practices.
I'm not talking
But
about the
there
law.
was a
I'm talking
state
about the
church.
religious,
Right.
like religious freedom.
Well,
kind of
yeah,
idea.
but I mean, England, is even when we left, was a secular state. I would argue, even though technically the King Charles is like the
Is
head of
still
the
the
church.
head of the church.
But
Yeah.
what good does that do? The guy's like a eco. He's
Okay,
an
sorry,
earth lover.
continue.
Anyway, okay. So the point is that these theocrats, they're going to impose their point of view, and so then the question is, well, why is it wrong to why is trans?
Hey guys, Sarah Stone here. Sorry to interrupt what I'm sure is a riveting podcast episode, but Theology by the Pint needs your help to continue providing these podcasts, offering our in-person events, and growing so we can bring thoughtful conversation and the hope of the gospel to a world that's increasingly walking away from church and from faith. Now that we're a 501c3 nonprofit, all donations are tax deductible, so we've crunched the numbers, and if each listener of this episode gave just $1 for each episode you listen to, we'd put a huge dent in our annual budget. So consider giving today. Go to theologybythepint.org/give and click the link to donate. Thanks so much, and now back to our show.
Why you're making a value judgment about abortion being good or trans being good or trans being bad or abortion being those are value judgments.
Yeah.
Well, what do you root that in? Well, it's so ultimately he comes down. He says, it's basically. It basically creates as little suffering as possible for as many people. So he says, oh, okay, so you're a consequentialist or utilitarian. And he says, I don't really bother myself with being a consequentialist or utilitarian. It's like, okay.
That's literally the definition.
Yeah,
of,
you may not know what the
utilitarianism.
word means. Okay, you may not.
But you just defined it.
But it's like, but that's what you are. So you might as well learn your point of view and learn the
But
stakes.
do you notice, whatever we call it, all of these alternative views start out by presupposing the value of human life.
Right.
And then they
Exactly right.
start arguing from there.
Yeah,
Because
But
what
that's-
else is suffering then?
Right.
Yeah.
That gives
but
the whole
ultimately,
game
I
away.
think what's proven is that yes, you say you value human life, but having a preference and only a preference as your moral foundation is going to lead you to prefer some humans over
Yes.
others.
got it.
Ultimately, so what is the worldview that actually defends and values all human beings?
Ooh, I know.
It's the Christian worldview.
It has to do with Jesus.
Yeah. And there are costs to a worldview. I mean, there are
right.
there are benefits to a worldview. There are costs to a
Ideas
worldview.
have consequences,
Yeah.
right? And it's not even
And they
clear
never want to
me-
pay the piper. And that's what
Right.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
I interrupted you first. It's not even clear to me that we can do as Richard Dawkins recommends and be culturally Christian, but not believe in
Right.
an external source that's above and beyond human opinion.
Not for long.
Because these ideas, they have consequences, as you were alluding to.
Yeah.
Right, it'll break down eventually.
Yeah.
Unless we are committed to the idea that there's an objective standard beyond human opinion, and if my desires run afoul of that, there's no wiggle room for me.
Yeah.
I've got to bring my behavior into obedience with that standard. I
Yeah.
can't make that standard fit the way I want.
Yeah.
Because then it's your standard.
What worries me is that, I think Eleazar, the MAGA debater, I guess, in this example, I think he's right. I think he does a great job of pinning Sam Cedar down. I think he points out contradiction after contradiction. That Sam Cedar's worldview it falls apart upon a very loose, easy, well done, but a basic cross-examination. What I worry about in this day and age, this is kind of why I'm like post-apologetic, is like I don't know if that matters. Like I don't know if there are going to be people out there like, oh my gosh, my worldview is inconsistent. what am I going to do? I think people are basically so committed to the flesh at this point and chasing their own passions, or the God is the belly, as Paul says, how do we cut through, beyond, just pointing out logical inconsistencies is nice. That's a question I continue to ask is how do we get beyond that? So if anyone has any answers, I'd love to know.
Well, I don't claim that, this is going to automatically, convince everybody of like, oh yeah, there is no objective secular basis for morality. But I think you can do that for some.
Yeah.
And I think we
Or spark conversations.
Yeah, that's the power of the Holy Spirit. So
I was
whether
just
that
gonna say,
is, there's a handful of people out there that start to think like, okay, yeah, that's right. Or even, I think part of the purpose of apologetics is not just evangelism, but also strengthening believers.
Yes.
Sure.
So hopefully
I think that's most of
and that's
what it
probably
is.
far
Me too.
more a likely outcome if we're just thinking like, probability is that that there would be believers that listen to this exchange that hadn't thought that deeply. They're like,
But I will say this though, I am noticing there is more and more an encroachment of apologetics, even this kind of presuppositional approach into like mainstream sources. So like this guy Eleazar ended up on Tim Pool's show and kind of rehashed a lot of these issues and these questions. And I thought that was pretty interesting because secularism is such a failure, as you said, that like there's nowhere left to go at this point. Like the only conversations left worth having are worldview conversations. Like I just there's no good arguments for abortion. Like there's no good arguments for for utilitarianism or it's just kind of like one, insanity after another. Yesterday we drove EVs, today we burn them.
Oh my gosh.
I mean,
we're not even talking about that today, but yeah.
So it's like where
that's
do we
actually
go from
a great
here?
example though.
Yeah.
That's actually, yeah.
Or the guy putting it, I'm not going to even say it. Anyway, there's some vandalism going on of Teslas that's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
while you're
there's
bringing up, you mentioned abortion, just another one I watched recently that's worth checking out is the Lila Rose one. She went on there.
Oh, she went on
recently
that
as
show.
well.
Yeah, I haven't
she did
watched
really
that.
well.
Did she do well?
Yeah.
Yeah, she sometimes she irritates me. She irritated me recently because this was actually I don't know if we talked about that on the show, but it's right in our wheelhouse where Ashley St. Clair, who's kind of a right-wing populist or influencer, she got pregnant with Elon's baby.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And so she kind of came public because she kind of had to apparently or something, or I don't know if she's trying to get money or what. Anyway, she came forward and said, I'm having Elon's baby. And she got congratulated from a lot of people, including Lila Rose, the Pasobics. Kind of like Charlie Kirk did not. So it's kind of interesting that it was like a who's who of like conservative influencers. And I'm like, we don't value that. Single motherhood, out of wedlock. It just reeks of bad form on everybody's part. Now, look, Elon's going to Elon. He's not a professing Christian. He's barely a conservative in any kind of meaningful sense. And he's all these kids with all these women. We don't like that, but we're like, okay, but if you'll help us win elections, we'll kind of keep our mouth shut about it. But like, she's like,
Same with Trump.
She's in that space and she's like, well, I'm a single mother. I'm like, we've been complaining about this for 50 years. Like, it's not good for the kid to not have a dad around. And you chose to like get impregnated by a guy that's never going to be there for his kid. Isn't that wrong?
Yes.
So I don't think Lila Rose should have congratulated her. She later came out and said, well, I was all life is good. I'm congratulating.
Right. It's tough. Yeah. How do you? Jennifer and I have wrestled with that, right? With people we know, like, how do we say, like, this is?
She shouldn't be shamed.
Life is a beautiful thing, but the circumstances that brought it about, we don't think is what ultimately leads to human flourishing.
I think
based on our Christian worldview.
Right.
What gets
pastors.
me about the story is just that I feel that it's a dishonest attack on Elon. For all the reasons that you said, I don't think that that's something that we should celebrate. I don't think it's necessarily irrelevant because it speaks to character and worldview and stuff like that. But Elon's not in the position that he's in because he was held up as a great family man.
Right.
He is in the position he's in because he's been remarkably successful in business and in particular in finding inefficiencies and rooting them out. And that's what we need him to do for us.
Yeah.
And that says nothing about the implications of the companies he's built.
Well, the most inefficient way to have children is to be married to one wife who can only give you one every like 10 months. You need multiple. The Mormons have this figured out. You got to spread it out.
Baby Elon's Mormon.
I'm going to populate Mars by myself if I have to.
Something like that.
I don't know how to segue from that, but let's talk about witches.
Let's do it.
Okay. So I heard this in passing and I thought it would just be a funny thing to pop in here. And and it's probably going to turn to nothing. Also, you printed me nothing from my article, but it's cool because I have it on my phone. So there's a Democratic politician in Maryland who brought this idea up. I guess she wanted to pass a bill or something to pardon 7 of the women who were tried and convicted. And by the way, only one of them was executed. I'm not saying we should execute anybody, but this was over 300 years ago. These women people claimed they were witches and they were convicted of such. And she wants to exonerate them posthumously as a matter of principle. And it's funny because in the article it was like there were so many other economic things to get to in their meeting, But she says, sorry,
Like school taxes.
like so many things. She says, I've got a real appetite for it being, I guess, justice. And the more I talk about it, the more people realize, no, this is serious, the Democrat said. Local media reported there were chuckles from the audience during Miss McNally's 18-minute testimony in which she declared witches were, quote, part of the deep DNA of our nation. But she says in here that she was motivated by the Supreme Court striking down Roe v. Wade in 2022, the Dobbs thing, and that she likened this serious issue of the witches from 300 years ago, so serious, to the persecution or to the debates around racial diversity initiatives, which the Trump administration is attempting to dismantle. Okay, so because of DEI, and then she also talked about trans stuff, and because of abortion, she wants to exonerate witches. It's just everything you want in one article,
Yeah.
But what made me chuckle is when I heard this. It was on one of the podcasts I listened to. When I heard it, I thought, well, she's actually being super consistent. And these people all do kind of belong in the same category. Like if you're upset about the Dobbs decision and you want more abortions, then yeah, you should be on the side of the witches. Now, were they really witches or not? I'm not going to get into that. But let's just say that they were. That means that they were giving themselves over to the demonic. And I think that same thing could be said for people that are pro-abortion or pro-transing children or some of the DEI initiatives. I mean, I don't think all of them kind of qualify, but
But when malign an entire race of people, for example.
Yeah. Or
So I don't know if I fully follow how the Dobbs decision. How do we get
sweet
from Dobbs
Mason.
to witches?
Yeah, I can't believe it's not obvious to you. I don't know either. I think it's that a group of people, she would say, as being oppressed unfairly. And the group of people in the Dobbs decision would be women that now have to be, quote, forced to keep their
So
pregnancies.
that like stoked the fire of her
Yes,
need
for justice, for
and
the
then
witches.
she found out about these 7 witches.
Oh, she probably had always known. Maybe she is one. No, it's just that she thinks that will like send a message to the oppressed peoples from the DEI stuff or the anti-DEI stuff, abortion, and the trans people that are so hated by the right. So if we exonerate these dead witches, which also, and then there's something else in the article about, sorry, the whole thing is kind of comical. There was something in one of the other ones about this that I couldn't get behind the paywall, but it was before that part that said something about how they, like in this session, they like named and said they were sorry to them. And I'm like, so you were talking to the dead. Well, that's on brand.
Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh, the whole thing
Exactly
is just.
what a witch would do.
I know. Are you a witch?
I think we should
Anyway.
take this lady, put her in water. If she drowns,
It's not, you don't put them in water. You tie a boulder to them.
Yeah.
The whole thing is.
But in water,
Evan.
right?
Yes, it's just like the Wizard of Oz.
Okay. I do think
No
this.
one mourns the
this
wicked.
I think this brings up questions of like, kind of, what is our nation? Like, what is our founding story? And there's a lot of ways you could go with this. For example, the 1619 Project essentially posited that the whole character of our nation is that of being slavers. Okay.
Don't get Taylor going on the 1619.
For her, it's that we're witch burners. And my question is,
And we're modern day witch burners because
Well,
we
naturally.
vilify women
Yeah.
that get abortions. Yeah.
I mean, by the way, there are like more Wiccans than there are Presbyterians in America. Okay, so
Oh,
that's
that's
slight
really
That's a
sad.
slight exaggeration, but
Oh, okay.
but not much.
But
There-
Wiccanism is growing.
there's
for
like
sure.
a million Wiccans. I mean, how many of them actually go to Coven on Sunday? I don't know, but
It's not Sunday.
okay.
Go to the meadow.
How many
at
hang
full
out at
moon.
the equinox? I don't know, but
I also wonder about the theology. It always seemed like kind of a loose theology to
Wiccan?
me. Right.
well,
and
I'm just saying
Do
they
no
use the
harm.
word witch. They use the words witch and witchcraft.
One of our
So-
earliest podcasts was with a Wiccan priest. You should go check it out in the archives of Theology on Air.
It's so long ago, and I don't even remember that. Maybe I wasn't there.
He said their first principle is do no harm. So much so
Yeah.
that some Wiccans try not to walk on grass.
Oh, well,
'Cause it
that's so
breaks
nice
it.
of them.
How can they ground themselves?
But
Okay, let me
but-
stop.
So if you're say an English colonist trying to grow crops in Georgia, did
Mm-hmm.
you ever hear about the witch burnings?
Probably not.
Yeah. Did 99% of Americans, those in
It's
this,
an elitist
in this continent, ever hear of this story? Probably not. This is how history is so kind of screwed up. Like we take all these centuries and we just condense it down to like a Sports Center newsreel highlight of witches were important. Actually, most people didn't even know this was going on.
They were important.
Like there weren't people burning,
Like
witches
this
in
is
most
not even
places.
Massachusetts, right? So like
Right.
this is not even the Salem witch trials,
Which
you
even
know,
that's
a
an
whole
exaggeration.
conversation,
Yeah,
right?
even that's exaggerated. So it's like I do think actually we if there's a Puritan scholar out there, I have heard some interesting things about Puritans. They're actually not as goody as we think.
Yeah.
They were serious Calvinists, but they drank a little and smoked a little, not pot, cigars or tobacco. Apparently, many of them wore very colorful clothes. They weren't as drab as we all kind of think they are. But like Nathaniel Hawthorne, going back to that, I mean, his the Scarlet Letter, and there are images that have kind of gotten foisted onto us that aren't actual reality.
Right.
And the idea that we're just a bunch of witch burners is similar to that. We just take things totally out of perspective. I give the example, I was in Los Angeles in 2019. They had a 7.0 earthquake when we were there. And we felt the earth move. It was kind of interesting. And it was the first big
felt the
earthquake in a long time. Nobody cared. Nobody cared. Nobody in LA cared at all. Nothing happened. And there wasn't a lot of damage, but like, it was a big headline, like nationally, and it just, I was like, oh, this is how it works. Like they tell a story that is like out of the norm.
It's
so it's a
evocative,
good
yeah.
headline and it works, but it made no difference at all. And I think our history kind of works the same way, where we take things that are out of granted. And so she's going to use that to say, we used to go after the outcast in the past, and now we're doing that again.
And by the way, seven. She should be exonerated. If she really wants to exonerate someone, she should find people that were like maybe wrongly went to the electric chair and they were innocent or something like that. Like
Right.
seven
Right.
witches. from
Right. That would-
300 years.
that would
So
be
It's
fun.
the
obscure.
principle of the matter. so,
Well, and that's why I pulled the article, because it's like, oh, you want to talk about people that commune with the devil, and then you want to put that right in line with abortion and trans ideology? Well done, ma'am. Well done. Consistent. So clap snaps for her.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
All right.
Okay.
Let's
Is that
get
so you don't
juicy.
kill skin cells.
Do no harm.
Right.
Okay, what you got next?
Taylor,
Oh, why don't you set this up? Actually, I want to.
me?
Yes.
Okay.
Real quick.
This was a tweet on X that Taylor doesn't know the background of this, but we'll leave that and see if we get to it. But there's a pastor here in the Houston area, and it's quick, so I'll just read it. He writes on X.
It's
He
actually
does a-
Facebook.
Okay, he does a lot of social media stuff. He says, I had a fantastic conversation. Oh, this is a very progressive pastor, I should say that. I had a fantastic conversation, with a new member recently. There's a typo in there. Oh, already finding mistakes. Okay, fine, sorry. About our inclusive theology. They asked me the best question. What if you're wrong? Which, by the way, is a great question. This question is such a great test for any theology. What if you're wrong? I could be wrong. Any of us could. Just imagine. Listen closely. If progressive, inclusive theology is wrong, that would mean standing before God while God says, quote, you have been too loving, too kind, too welcoming, end quote. The God I know would never say such a thing. I'm sorry, I'm trying not to throw up with my mouth while I say this. Last part says, if I'm in error and the choice is between being too judgmental or being too loving, that feels like an easy choice. Dun, 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 dun. Anyway, is that a good enough setup?
Yeah.
And
so
Taylor doesn't like it.
I've got several problems with this. The first one is that I think it's circular, actually, because they're presupposing that their position is the more loving, more kind position. But of course, that is the very issue under dispute.
Yeah.
So if you start by assuming
yeah.
your conclusion,
Yeah.
you're likely to.
So, for example, if you're pro LGBT, that's the more loving position because you're allowing people.
because that's
to,
how you've defined it,
Right.
right?
And yeah.
So that's the first problem. And then I had another issue where is this he?
Yes.
Yeah.
Where he says it's an easy choice. So even if we take his framing, then you've got the progressives on one side that are full of grace and love to the exclusion of justice and truth. The only reason that the love and mercy would be an easy choice for you is if you value your own standard beyond God's, because they're all important to God. They're all part of his essential nature.
Yeah.
And so to pick and choose between them is to import your own value system onto God. And then also, it's not even clear to me that we can be loving if we exclude truth and justice.
Yeah.
There's a real question about that. But I do kind of concede that there is a point lurking in there that he might be onto. I have sometimes noticed that my really conservative friends, they are all about the truth and justice. Sometimes maybe forgetting about the love and mercy part a little bit. And it same is kind of generally true for folks on the progressive Christian side. It's all about the love and acceptance and all of that kind of stuff. But I think both are in error.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a point in here that is valid about like theological humility, right? And this is where I think things like theological triage are important, where we identify that there are certain doctrines that we are more confident about than others for various reasons, whether like scripture is just overtly clear, whether it's a historical precedent, like the church has literally believed this across geography, across time for 2,000 years, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't think that applies to everything. And one of the things I found interesting about this is he's advocating for theological humility, and he's admitting that he may be wrong. And then his climactic line is,
But not
the
about
God
this.
I know would never say such a thing.
Yeah.
Are you? What if you're wrong?
Sorry.
It's
Wow.
bolder than the first claim, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
That's
That's a
good,
great
Mace.
catch.
I missed that.
Good catch.
Yeah, that's great.
I want some definitions. Like, what the heck is inclusive theology? Inclusive theology sounds lovely. It sounds like including people, which of course Jesus did. We know that. But that's not what it is. Inclusive theology, we know some more about this person, but it has to do with anything that you want to bring into your theology, your worldview, your hermeneutic, how you read the Bible, that you want it to say, you make it say.
Which actually strikes me as very
Exclusive.
opposite.
Yeah. It's excluding a lot of things Jesus said, honestly. So inclusive theology is more just, this might as well just say my theology, or my current views. Anyway, it's
Jesus
so
was,
annoying.
of course, accepting of everybody, but he was not accepting of all theologies.
Yeah.
And in fact, he had very harsh words to say about the Pharisees and their theology.
And by the way, even all these, sinners that he hung out with, the words were harsh. I'm sure he said them tenderly and they were received as such. But he says, go and sin no more. Ouch. That's not great to hear. Like, that's making some assumptions. You're saying I'm sinning and I need to stop. But yeah, I'll leave that alone for now, actually.
Well, it's like the old joke about somebody like being asked in a job interview like what their strengths and weaknesses
Yeah,
are, and well, I'm just too good at my job.
I'm a perfectionist.
Yeah, I do the job of 3 people, so but that's literally what it says. It's like, I'm literally too loving. I'm too kind. I'm too welcoming. I mean, it's right there in the thing, and it's like, I mean, hey, I don't think we
way-
should think so well of ourselves. First of all,
Too loving to the murderer is unloving to the victim.
Thank you
Right.
for saying that, because
Right.
that was what I was on the way in here. I was thinking I wanted to say something like that. Being loving and kind and gracious to whom and when and how can be extremely unloving. Yes.
or,
That's
or-
not to say that there's not grace and forgiveness for the murderer
Right.
who is repentant.
Right. Right.
Christ came in grace and truth.
Right.
Yeah, I pulled that up. John 1:14. Yeah, glory is of the only Son of the Father, full of grace and truth. I mean, and in the Lutheran world, and this is a Lutheran pastor, albeit in the ELCA, which is a hugely progressive denomination that I left over a decade ago. But that is law-gospel distinction. God tells you how you should live. That's the law. And then the gospel is what God has done for you, because you are incapable of being perfect, et cetera, et cetera. So, we live in this, not tension per se, but these
Well, rescued
two
people.
realities.
Yeah. From
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And so And so a lot of the ethical things we debate in the church today, I'm a broken record on this, but those are legal questions. They're questions of law. They're they're ethical questions. They're not really gospel questions. I mean, how you should live is an ethical question. It's a question of law. And as the left has basically shaved off or just eliminated one ethical standard after another about what is gender, what is murder, and talking about abortion, and what is sex, and what is this. I'll say this. Let me see if I can say this. Without, I don't know if I can say that. Even without it saying someone's name. Let me just say this. There was someone who was interested in being a pastor, and they showed up for an interview, and it was revealed that they had been living with someone outside of marriage of the opposite sex for many years, and they still thought like they were qualified to be a minister, and so it's like, no, that's an ethical question. Your ethics are all wrong, and we're not going to just gloss over that with the gospel. You know what I'm saying? Because we're nice, because we're kind, because we're welcoming.
We can take this really basic. I mean, if as a working definition of truth, we say that truth is that which corresponds to reality, then by its very nature, it excludes whatever is its opposite.
Yeah.
Right. And so these ideas, they can't coexist in a way. They're mutually exclusive. If you include everything, then contradiction is rife.
It's back to the same Cedar question, the worldview question of like every worldview has kind of pros and cons. Oh, my camera died.
Well, here, you do that and I'll say something about this. Okay. I wonder, so if you've been listening for a while, you know that I just finished teaching Revelation to my women's Bible study for about a year and a half. When you're reading Revelation, you want God to be wrathful and bring judgment against the sexual molesters, the human traffickers, the most terrible people. And it's not to say, by the way, the whole reason why the gospel is because it is in response to that kind of sin. And so what we we have an option to say, I'm going to cling to Christ and claim, his goodness for my own, but only because I am so bad. And so you can't just have one, like you were saying earlier, you can't just have the gospel without the bad stuff. And by the bad stuff will be punished. Yeah. It's either punished by what Christ took on the cross, or you will pay. Yeah. Like those are the only options, but someone's gonna pay.
Right.
And the Christians that are often most vocal about crying for justice are the progressives.
Yeah.
Which by the way, though, to call back to our previous discussion, that is how God balances the scales between mercy and justice.
Yes.
His perfect justice, his perfect mercy. Right? Either you pay for the sins or he pays for them, but they get paid for.
Yeah. What has bothered me about the theological left for so long is the way it's circular reasoning. That's kind of the logical problem, but they even interpersonally, they claim the moral high ground, right? So they just claim it. We are the loving people. And
that's kind of what you were starting with.
Yeah. And I just feel like, that's kind of in arguing with them or in leading that denomination or whatever, that's the very thing you have to call to account. Say, you're just assuming that you have the high moral ground, but you can't explain why.
Yeah.
Like, we have a moral position as well. And, obviously everyone kind of thinks they have the high moral ground or they wouldn't hold that position, but you should at least approach ethical questions like this with some humility. You should be like, well, I think this is what the Bible says, or I'm pretty sure this is what the Bible says, or I'm darn right certain this is what the Bible says.
Well, maybe that's the question right after, what if you're wrong? The next thing should be, let's see what the Bible says.
Right. Yeah.
Not that that's always easy. I'll grant you that, but
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I had a couple of relatively quick stories that kind of seem to contradict one another, so I'm not sure what's true. I'll just kind of try to run through them quickly. But so one is from the Christian Post. The headline is half of churches seeing growth since COVID-19 pandemic lockdowns study. The article says around half of Protestant churches in the United States have experienced growth in worship service attendance since the end of COVID-19 pandemic, according to a recent study. This is Lifeway Research, published Tuesday, found that 52% of surveyed Protestant congregations, saw their worship attendance grow by at least 4% over the last 2 years. By contrast, 33% of the surveyed congregations said attendance has plateaued, with between 4% decline to 4% growth, and 15 said they have over 4% decline in attendance. So that's interesting because the number that I had heard post-COVID was 20%. Like church attendance was down 20%. So I'm glad to hear that a majority are up a little bit and a lot are pretty much steady, pretty much even. So that's good news. Hold any thoughts on that if you have them, because the next article is more about, and by the way, that's attendance. It's not necessarily membership or participation. So those aren't necessarily the same thing. And there's lies, damned lies, and statistics, right? So this is from Crisis Magazine, and it's just one article of many that are talking about a Pew Research finding, which basically, this was a new survey on religion in America. This was the first major one of this type since 2014. And this was a major stat that just totally jumped out at me. My cousin at Everyman Commentary wrote an article about this as well. But basically, for Protestants, for every 100 people that have become Protestant, 180 people leave.
Leave what?
Leave Protestantism or leave the church.
Oh, okay.
For Catholics, it's 100 that join, 840 leave.
Dang.
So he says, so when you rejoice seeing folks become Catholic at Easter, which you should, remember that more than 8 people have left by the back door for each one who's come in the front.
Those people coming in must smell bad.
Yeah.
Grief.
And so, more people, he talks about, Crisis is a Catholic magazine, so he goes into some detail about, where these people, what they're becoming. A lot of them are becoming NONES, nuns, as we've talked about a lot of times on the show. He does say that immigration is sort of bolstering a lot of Catholic numbers. That's maybe an argument as to why Catholics facilitated or helped immigration. I don't know. I think that was probably more financial, if I had to guess, because millions and billions of dollars went to various, church organizations that don't have a lot of money, and then who knows? Who knows what they actually use that money for? Anyway, so only 19% of Americans identify as Catholic, and I think we all know a much smaller percentage than that actually go to Mass weekly, which is
interesting because it's a mortal sin to miss Mass.
Yeah, it's like,
according to the Catholics, we don't believe that.
And holy days of obligation and so on and so forth. So, confession is a sacrament. You're really not supposed to take communion, I think, apart from confession.
Right. That's correct.
You need to go with a clean heart and all of that. So,
so the gist is Protestants up, Catholics down?
Well, we're down at a slower rate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Because we're still losing 180 or something for every 100 we gain.
Well, according to that one, but the article before was saying we're coming back up in numbers.
Oh, right.
But I think the trick to harmonizing those two is that the one that says that half of churches are seeing growth since COVID-19, they start measuring at the end of COVID-19, where essentially numbers were artificially depressed. And so it seems like, it's no wonder.
Maybe it's just back up to equilibrium.
Right. I think the data that we need probably, would have to stretch back pre-COVID.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how much to make of this 52% up since
Yeah.
COVID.
Right.
But I will say, Mason and I were having a conversation before we came on air. I think everybody feels the vibe shift in the country, and maybe because we do apologetics, I've been saying this for a couple of years even, that I feel like people are starting to ask more of the meaning questions, more of the, like, what about morality kind of questions, and not as much the cosmology and not as much the, evolution and all that kind of stuff. So I do think that this is an opportunity for us, but it's not just going to happen, obviously.
Yeah, I agree that there's a vibe shift. There's I think, as we said before, like humanism, secularism, they failed. Like, they don't produce the kind of fruit you need. We have men that think they're women. Children are, I think, in danger. Our education system works. There's a lot that, even our supply chains, we're pretty fragile with COVID. So there's just I know that's economics, but just culturally, I think, look at Hollywood. Somehow there was like the 1967 Academy Awards. There was a link to that on YouTube the other day, like the 15-minute introduction. And I kind of skipped through it. And it was like all the beautiful people, dressed, it was just the epitome of class, the orchestra playing. There was nothing sarcastic about
Elegant Hollywood glam.
Yeah, yeah. And we all know there was a seedy, underbelly to that whole thing even at that time. But now it's like you look at Hollywood and it's just kind of icky. Nobody really watches the Oscars anymore. It's gross. Kanye West shows up in some invisible dress with his wife.
His wife. He's not in an invisible dress. That would be awkward.
But you get that. It's just the culture is just kind of disintegrated. I think there is a critical mass of people who are like, okay, I'm open to hearing other things.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, by the way, this is kind of the fruition of what we were talking about before. The whole secular humanist perspective rests on assumptions that cannot be inferred from their worldview, right? And so I'm not surprised that we see debauchery when it's practiced at large.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing, I mean, post-COVID, not that this wasn't happening before COVID, but especially during and after, people are lonely. I mean, wasn't it just a few years ago that the Surgeon General declared that loneliness is an epidemic?
Vivek Murthy, I think. Vivek Murthy.
Sure.
Yeah, an epidemic of loneliness. Yes.
And so I think I've experienced like people in my own life that are searching for community, and you hope that they search for it in a place where they will find Jesus, but they're going for community first. I actually have a friend, she will never listen to this podcast, but if she does, I mean, that's fine because I'm not going to say anything bad about her, but she's an atheist and she comes to my conversations group, which is for people that are not believers. And she, I don't know, several months ago reached out. She's like, Sarah, I want to start doing something like once a week where there's like people that I know and they know me and they'll miss me if I'm not there. And it's like community and friendship. And it builds.
Church?
Yeah, I know. And I was like, we'll call her Jenny. I was like, Jenny, you know what I'm going to say, right? And she's like, well, not church. I'm like, no worries. Bible study will do,
Right.
But she, I mean, it was just so perfect in that text. What she's asking for is what the church provides.
Right.
And that's the stepping stone, hopefully, to community in Christ.
Right.
Which is kind of what we're trying to do, by the way, at Theology by the Pint. I mean, a little bit, somebody just asked me the other day, sorry, what started Theology by the Pint, formerly known as Theology on Tap. And part of it was to build community and then create space where people, when they have that community, are listening to and engaging and being curious about spiritual ideas, hopefully to, if they're a believer, draw them closer to the Lord and deepen their faith. And if they're not a believer, introduce them to and have them follow Jesus.
Yeah.
So sorry.
I was just going to say, as someone in the church planting world, like that, this is a topic of conversation. So for us personally, that's why one of our top values is relational, that we're trying to be relational in everything we do, foster community. I just heard a podcast with a relatively new church in Nashville that's like blowing up, and that was like the thing that they put their thumb on. It's like, man, people need community. And I as you were talking and sharing that, it made me think that recently Jennifer and I hosted a block party at our house, and we had like probably 40 or 50 people
Nice.
over to our house. 6 of those were neighbor households that we've gotten to know, and 5 of them were families that we know from baseball and softball. And, I'm not saying all those people don't have friends outside of us, but it was just like people like really clung to
They
that.
flock,
Yeah, exactly. And, when we do stuff like that, we just often get comments about how life-giving it is.
Yeah, and specifically when it's around church or something that's like church adjacent, there's a sociological need that's being met there to be around and socialize with others. But I feel like there's also a spiritual need that's getting met. Sometimes they didn't know they brought
They
it.
don't even realize it maybe sometimes at first. Yeah.
So every year we host on New Year's Day, we host like a chili thing. And I actually go door to door and break federal law and put things in people's mailbox to invite them to, but this year I only had 2 neighbors. And I'm like, why don't more people come? So I guess I need to live in the cool, hip place like the Heights, I guess on the east side, they just don't care.
Well, I think that could be something like a sociological thing. But honestly, that was like a really cool thing that we saw. So we try to do these, we call them easy invite events about once a month. And so we did a Christmas party. And one of the families that I would say that when we planted the church was probably the most mature Christian family. They have their own will and volition, made their own invites and went around. And they had neighbors come that they had never met before, which I thought was really cool. And I was just like, man, that wouldn't have happened prior to them like helping us start this church. So just seeing, I took that as a church planter encouragement of growth in our people. But I do think, for us, like cold calling works, but most of these relationships is like there were several steps leading up to, hey, come to this big party at our house.
Yeah.
That was not being critical of what you did. That was saying that was meant to be an encouragement of like, hey, 2 neighbors is pretty good. In this day and age.
I hear you. Real quick. I mean, when I think about like apologetics and presuppositional apologetics, there's this phrase that Greg Bonson used where, basically, how does he know that it's true? And his answer is the impossibility of the contrary. So the idea is that God cannot not exist, right? It's impossible that the opposite of my point of view is true because it's utterly delusional and absurd. It's technically absurd.
At the
It's literally
very
impossible.
best, there would be no way to know it.
Yeah, yeah. So what's happening, I think, is that the world, without knowing it in those terms, is that they're realizing that they've sought these things, and it's just we're now defaulting into this position. I see, like in the conservative space, people are like defaulting into the point of view of the truth of Christian truth claims, of the inescapable reality of Christian truth claims, because there's nowhere else to go. Like once all these other things fail, they don't make sense. They can't make sense in an orderly world. They can't provide for justice. They can't provide for grace or mercy or any of those things. Like it's like, oh yeah, like that was true all along. So,
And so you're talking about things like the beginning of the universe a finite time ago out of nothing.
yeah,
Right? There's
That-
no other explanation than
Right.
something beyond the universe that's timeless, spaceless,
Yeah.
immaterial, enormously powerful, all that stuff.
Yeah.
We've been circling it all day with morality.
yeah,
There's also the argument of God's necessity,
Yeah.
right? For our the reliability of our cognitive faculties as well.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think that's a really, really powerful point, and we should say that these arguments from natural theology, they don't establish Christianity is true per se, but they do exclude a lot of other
Yeah.
belief systems, and it's remarkable.
And it's a trajectory on the way.
Right. The amount of characteristics that you can infer just from the three arguments that
Yeah.
were listed there sound an awful lot like the
Yeah.
God of the Bible.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I think we should talk about this article by this guy, Yvonne. No, let me stop.
Yeah.
It's by our very own Evan. Evan, tell us about
Well,
it.
I'll send people that way. They can read it. It's on my Substack I write for, Everyman Commentary, so you can subscribe there. I think you can find it online. What an actual founding style revolution would look like. And the basic idea is that Trump is doing some, from my point of view, I mean, even if you hate him, you'd have to say he's doing a lot of pretty kind of paradigm shifting things. He's moving the Overton window. I mean, he is crashing it hard in another direction and redefining sort of what is politically acceptable. And so, he's working towards a balanced budget. He's closed the border. He's defending America on the global stage. He's strategically reclaiming the Western Hemisphere as America's. He's bringing back hope to a moribund nation. I mean, he's done all that in like 50 days, and he's still signing executive orders. He's closing the Department of Education. And, right now he's got a lot of wind at his sails, and pretty much, because he is a populist, he's kind of, taking on these kind of common sense, revolution of common sense and all that. He's pretty much like 60-40, 70-30, 80-20 on like every issue. I mean, like no one is for girls and men's sports anyway, except a handful of people
Even
still
Gavin
fighting.
Newsom recently came
Yeah,
out.
yeah, exactly. So, so the GOP broadly, or the, kind of, conservative side of America is pretty much has a lot of what's going on. But my basic point is that he wants to be seen like literally on Mount Rushmore, but figuratively as one of the great presidents. And to get there, he can't just kind of tinker at the edges. And I think it's time for him to basically, pull a Jimmy Carter, put on a cardigan, sit in front of a fireplace and level with the American people.
You said something about Grandpa Trump. I like
Grandpa
that.
Trump. I think we need Grandpa Trump. And I think that like we really need someone, and it's the best chance we've had in a very long time for him to basically, I think, actually question the greatness of America, which kind of goes counter to his own motto, but question the greatness of America as an empirical state since post-World War II and say what actually made America great is this, and we're going to go back to that. We're going to like get rid of the deep state, and we're going to get rid of property taxes, which means the government effectively owns your property. We're going to get rid of income taxes, which is a penalty on your production and your contribution to society, your labor, which is like the most sacred thing that you can offer the world is your time, because you have such a finite amount of it.
It's what your life is made of.
Yeah, exactly. So we need to go beyond like not even something like a balanced budget at this point is a radical idea, but we need to go far beyond that. Like we actually need to get to a point where it's like the government is going to go back to a founding level size and scope and get away from Woodrow Wilson, New Deal, Great Society, all these sorts of things.
Paradigm shift was the right word, because I think what's underlying all of this is that there has to be a change in our perception of our relationship to the government. Like, what's the appropriate relationship that we should have to the government? How much should they do?
And we've
What
just
things should-
slowly, like the frog and the bot, as they say, it's not actually
It's
true.
actually, yeah.
Yeah, frogs do jump out. But anyway, we just acclimated like, oh yeah, we pay taxes, and oh yeah, it's this percentage, and oh yeah, like service sucks, and oh yeah, like we fight endless foreign wars, and we're $2 trillion in debt every year, and we print money to make up
It's
for
just the status quo. Yeah.
yeah, and like this is, I think, our I don't want to say our only chance, because I think actually a lot of those problems will have to get solved by just brute force, by just reality. Like you can't have inflation forever. You can't have deficits.
Well, the
forever.
welfare state one, I think also, it's going to crash and burn.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this is how great empires collapse. It's usually not because they get conquered. It's usually that they collapse under loose fiscal policy and political discord.
Yeah. Right.
And
And it's
cheery.
ugly. It's ugly. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm hopeful that, like, in an upcoming podcast, I did interview Brian Lance, and he wrote a book called "Rebuild USA: The Trump Presidency and Beyond," and it really looks at economic issues and what's the word? It's productive economy, or I can't remember. Anyway, it's the kind of actual economy, the physical economy, as opposed to this kind of service sector economy. In that vein, Bob Lighthizer was on Tucker Carlson's podcast, and even if you hate Tucker Carlson and think he's a nut job, you should really listen to what Bob Lighthizer has to say. If Cody Pogue were here, I would say
He's like our sweet Democrat that comes and lets us.
and I'm like, you really need to listen to what is being said here, because so many of the policies in terms of defending the working class and onshoring jobs, and how America has just been robbed from the inside out by not just outsourcing jobs, but all the innovation that actually goes with manufacturing. We have this idea in America now that manufacturing is like poor man's work. It's dirty people's work. No. We're above that. We drive quiet electric cars. Our fingernails never get dirty, and whatever. And we can work from home. Like, that's not real life. And in China has surpassed us, not just economically in many respects, but in terms of innovation, in terms of the kind of things that they can produce that we can't produce. Supposedly they have an EV that recharges in 5 minutes now. So I don't know how true that is. Their AI is competitive to ours now. Anyway, so we really need, I hate to say it, for all people who are like already freaking out at what Trump is doing, he actually needs to go much, much further. We actually need to like reset like this whole thing, and like, it's going to take maybe a couple of decades, but like put us on a trajectory to get back to where like we actually really are a free people again, because I think we've by and large forgotten what that looks like.
Well, it sounds like what you want him to do, and I don't know that he's going to do this. I mean, I hope he does, but is you want him to call a family meeting.
Yeah.
And
yes.
and
or a partners meeting in business.
yes,
and
really have
talk.
a reality check.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I hate to say this, but the JFK files.
Take a drink.
It's at the heart of it. The Epstein files are at the heart of it.
Did you say Epstein? So funny. Okay.
Epstein, I don't know.
Yeah.
However it's
Continue.
said.
JFK and Epstein. Yeah.
Because I think because all of us were kind of grew up on the kind of the myth that America is like the greatest nation, right? And part of what political assassinations
Myth,
and
you say?
myth in terms of the story we tell ourselves. I do think that America, our founding principles, and much of our history, and much of what we still offer the world, see 1 million people coming here legally every year, we are the greatest nation that the world has ever known as a nation state, and so on and so forth. So I do think that's true. I'm not doing a 1619 rewrite. What I am saying, though, is that founding has in many ways been betrayed, and we're not always a morally, perfect nation. And, I think we need someone to be like, we haven't always been great in this way. Let's go back to what, let's own it, and let's get back to, I don't know, something more reasonable.
Well, I think that's what's been missing from the conversation for 20 years. We've had plenty of discussion about like the responsibility and culpability of America for its sins.
Slavery. Yeah.
And slavery foremost among them. But there hasn't been any kind of counterbalance. Like nobody ever says like what was going on in the rest of the world when America had slaves. How did they compare to their contemporaries and that kind of thing. So I'm for looking at both sides of the ledger. And as long as we do that, I think a conversation about how we improve is just the next logical thing.
Yep.
But I would love to have a president, any president, take the sort of fatherly position of like, guys, we're doing well, but man, we have to look at some hard truths, and here's some of them. the
He
welfare
doesn't
state.
have to worry about being reelected again. So
That's right.
now's
He
the
has
time
nothing to
have that
lose.
conversation.
Well,
Except his legacy. But
So
yeah.
I probably have more concerns about Trump than you do. But I think that was one of the best points you made in the article, though, is that all of his policies are more popular than he is personally.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
that's actually
that's
a really
funny.
good thing. Like if you want an executive to be reined in if he tests his powers, but you also want him to do more from a policy standpoint and be successful and hand off a successful administration to, JD Vance in 4 years, well then this is what you would do.
Yeah, there's a I couldn't find it. I quoted it in a sermon recently, but someone did a study of what is popular and what is unpopular in terms of legislation and what gets passed. And basically, it doesn't matter what's popular or unpopular. That basically there's this range of policy that actually gets done. It's like a 40 percentile range, and that's the only thing that ever gets done. And so, in other words, 40% popular issues are the only thing that ever get done. Even things that are 100% popular don't get done. Like things that everyone would agree with.
Is that poison pills or like what?
Well, I think it's lobbying and special interests, and basically the fact that every congressman is bought off. They're like the NASCAR driver who has sponsors. And so things that we want, industry doesn't want. So why can't we get, red dye 40 out of our food, even though it's not allowed in medicine for 30 years? Why can't we get it out of our food? Well, I think hopefully we all know the answer to that by now, because there are industries that protect it. Because
much
Coca-Cola
corruption.
gives money to the Diabetes Foundation, because the American Heart Association, is up there defending, the right to buy soft drinks with EBT in a hearing the other day.
You've
Least
got
I didn't see
Bayer
that,
and
but I heard that.
Monsanto just going round and round giving money to each other's pockets.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
making them
all
sick,
the
making them
Maha
well.
stuff is
It's
like,
big
that's a
challenge
lot of
getting
what's...
rid of the Department of Education too, by the way.
What's that?
Well, it's adjacent to so many
Yes.
powerful politicians and so much money.
It's so entrenched, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like, so we all agree that that should be done. And so when Trump talks about a revolution of common sense, he's not, that's not a throwaway line. Like he is literally saying, hey, there are things that we all think should be done. Like reciprocal
Let's stop
tariffs.
sitting on our butts. Yeah.
Everyone agrees that if we have to pay a tariff and they have to pay a tariff, yeah, we got to go. Then let's just do that. And everyone agrees. So why did it never get done? Well, we're going to get it done. We are out of time. You have places to be. You have places
It's
to be.
way past 401.
Absolutely. Okay. Where can people find you, Taylor?
Do you want to be found?
Of course
you want
I do.
people to engage with you? Okay.
Yeah, of course I do. Neilology.com. I have a blog
2
there.
L's.
There's also a way to
Well,
contact me. Thank you. NEILLOLOGY.com.
You can find out everything you need to know about Theology by the Pint at theologybythepint.org, which also has little bios. We need to go back and read those and see if they're still relevant, about all the leadership teams. So if you want to know about me or Evan or Marquise or Meredith or Beth or all the other people on our leadership team, you can go there, theologybythepint.org. You can also find out how to give us money on that website, which is how we fund everything we do, your donations. So consider it.
Awesome. Yeah, Mace Perez, thejourneyhouston.org.
Yeah. And I'm Evan McClanahan at First Lutheran, flhouston.org. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time, we encourage you to question freely, think deeply, and disagree as needed.
We made it. You should.